The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The forest floor was a tapestry of fallen needles, creating a soft, almost silent carpet beneath one's feet. The mist clung to the ground, weaving through the trees like a ghostly shroud. A chill settled deep in Dr. Masao Tanaka's bones despite the summer humidity. It was an odd sensation, one that seemed to defy the warmth of the season. He couldn't help but shiver, his body reacting to an unseen presence, a cold that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. He stood at the edge of Aokigahara, a vast expanse of emerald green swallowing the sunlight. The forest stretched out before him, an endless sea of trees that seemed to go on forever. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Locals called it yokai, the sea of trees, a name that fit its silent, undulating immensity. The forest was a living entity, its vastness both awe-inspiring and intimidating. It was easy to see why it had earned such a name, with its seemingly endless waves of green. This was a place where compasses spun uselessly, where shadows held their breath, and whispers seemed to rise from the very roots of the ancient trees. The forest had a way of disorienting those who entered, its magnetic anomalies causing compasses to spin wildly. The roots of the trees seemed to whisper secrets, their gnarled forms casting eerie shadows. Dr. Tanaka, a respected psychiatrist, had come seeking solace, a temporary escape from the city's stifling chaos. The demands of his profession had taken their toll, and he yearned for the peace and quiet that only nature could provide. He hoped that the forest would offer him a sanctuary, a place to clear his mind and find some semblance of peace. He sought the tranquility of nature, a chance to clear his mind and recenter his spirit. The forest, with its serene beauty and calming presence, seemed like the perfect place to do so. He imagined himself meditating among the trees, finding a sense of inner peace that had eluded him for so long. But as he ventured deeper into the forest's embrace, a prickling unease crept up his spine. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees, once welcoming, now seemed to loom ominously, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. It was a silence that seemed to amplify every sound, making even the smallest noise seem deafening. The crow's call echoed through the trees, a haunting reminder of the forest's eerie stillness. It was a silence that seemed to listen, to watch. The forest felt alive, as if it were aware of his presence. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch seemed to be a whisper, a murmur of something unseen and unknown. He pushed those thoughts aside, attributing them to the stories he had heard. He reminded himself that he was a man of science, a rational thinker. The eerie feelings were just that, feelings, nothing more. He tried to focus on the beauty of the forest, the tranquility he had come to find. Legends whispered of the Yoroi, a spectral samurai said to wander the forest, its armor clanking mournfully, searching for something lost and never to be found. The stories were old, passed down through generations, and they spoke of a warrior's restless spirit, forever bound to the forest. He was a man of science, a man of logic. He had spent his life studying the human mind, understanding the complexities of thought and emotion. Ghosts and legends had no place in his world of facts and evidence. Ghosts and legends were for children's bedtime stories. They were tales meant to entertain, to frighten, but not to be taken seriously. He dismissed the stories as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations. Yet, as the shadows lengthened and the silence deepened, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering secrets he couldn't understand. The feeling of unease grew stronger, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the legends than he had initially believed. The path beneath his feet, barely discernible from the forest floor, wound deeper into the heart of Aokigahara. Each step he took seemed to echo in the silence, the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot, a stark contrast to the otherwise stillness of the forest. The deeper he ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around him, the trees growing denser and the path more elusive. The sunlight, already struggling to penetrate the dense canopy, grew dimmer, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted with the gentle breeze. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing and shifting with every gust of wind. The interplay of light and shadow created an almost hypnotic effect, drawing him further into the depths of the woods. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with an almost palpable sense of sorrow and despair. It was as though the very atmosphere was saturated with the emotions of those who had walked these paths before him. The mist that clung to the ground added to the sense of foreboding, wrapping around his legs like ghostly tendrils. The forest whispered around him, the wind rustling through the leaves like 1,000 mournful voices. Each rustle seemed to carry a message, a fragment of a story long forgotten. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging him to listen, to understand the secrets hidden within the forest. Dr. Tanaka found himself captivated by the stories he had dismissed as mere folklore. The tales of spirits and lost souls that he had once considered mere superstition now seemed to hold a grain of truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was trying to communicate with him, to share its ancient wisdom. The legend of the Yoroi, in particular, tugged at the edges of his rational mind. The story of the betrayed samurai left to die in the forest resonated with him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was as if the samurai's spirit was reaching out to him, seeking recognition and understanding. The samurai, they said, had been betrayed by his lord, stripped of his honor, and left to die in the forest. His spirit, unable to find peace, was said to wander the forest, forever searching for the justice that had been denied to him in life. The image of the samurai, clad in his armor, haunted Dr. Tanaka's thoughts. Now his restless spirit wandered Aokigahara, forever seeking peace that eluded him. The thought of such a fate sent a shiver down Dr. Tanaka's spine. He couldn't help but wonder if the samurai's spirit was watching him, judging him, as he walked through the forest. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind of such fanciful notions. He reminded himself that he was a man of science, a doctor who relied on facts and evidence. Yet the forest seemed to defy logic, its mysteries beyond the reach of rational explanation. He was a doctor, a man of reason and logic. His training had taught him to seek out the truth, to question everything. But here, in the heart of Aokigahara, the lines between reality and legend seemed to blur. The forest challenged his beliefs, forcing him to confront the possibility that there were things beyond his understanding. Yet, the deeper he ventured into the forest, the more difficult it became to ignore the whispers of the wind, the shadows that seemed to move just beyond his peripheral vision. Every rustle, every flicker of movement seemed to carry a hidden meaning. It was as if the forest was alive, watching him, testing him. The forest was alive with unseen energies, with a history that hummed beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. Dr. Tanaka could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, the stories of those who had come before him whispering in his ears. The forest held secrets, ancient and powerful, that seemed to call out to him, and for the first time, Dr. Tanaka felt a flicker of fear, cold and sharp in the pit of his stomach. It was a fear born not of the unknown, but of the realization that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. The forest, with its whispers and shadows, had a life of its own, and he was but a visitor in its ancient domain. Hours seemed to melt away as Dr. Tanaka pressed on, his initial confidence waning with the fading light. The path, faint and often disappearing altogether, led him deeper into the heart of Aokigahara. The trees, gnarled and ancient, pressed close, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a dense, suffocating canopy that blotted out the sky. It was as if the forest itself were closing in, swallowing him whole. The oppressive silence remained, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, or the mournful cry of a distant bird. It was a silence that pressed against his eardrums, a tangible, almost suffocating presence. He found himself holding his breath, listening for any sound, any sign of life beyond the rustling of the leaves. He thought about turning back, about retracing his steps to the safety of the path's edge. Yet something drew him forward, a strange compulsion he couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was a morbid curiosity, a desire to see what lay at the heart of this place of whispers and shadows. Or perhaps, he thought with a shiver, it was the forest itself, guiding him, drawing him towards something he could not yet comprehend. The air grew noticeably colder as Dr. Tanaka stumbled upon a clearing. The temperature drop was sudden and stark, as if he had crossed an invisible threshold into another realm. His breath formed small clouds in the chilly air, and he pulled his coat tighter around himself. In the center stood an ancient stone shrine, its surface worn smooth by time and the elements. The shrine seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, its stones whispering tales of centuries gone by. Moss and vines clung to its surface, nature's attempt to reclaim what was once hers. A single weathered stone lantern stood before it, its flame long extinguished, leaving only a faint trace of incense lingering in the air. The lantern, though small, seemed to guard the shrine, a silent sentinel that had witnessed countless rituals and prayers. The silence here was even more profound, as though the very air held its breath, heavy with unspoken grief and a palpable sense of dread. The forest around him seemed to close in, the trees standing like solemn sentinels, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. He felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the shrine. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was reluctant to let him proceed. The weight of countless souls seemed to press down on him, urging him to turn back. This was a place of reverence, a place where people came to pay their respects to those who had passed. Offerings of flowers and incense lay at the base of the shrine, tokens of love and remembrance left by those who still felt the pull of the past. But there was something else here, something more ancient and unsettling. It was as if the very ground beneath the shrine held memories of a time long forgotten, memories that were now seeping into the present. It emanated from the very stones themselves, a tangible aura of sorrow and despair. The stones seemed to weep, their surfaces slick with moisture that might have been tears. The air was thick with a sense of loss, a grief that had no end. He thought of the Yoroi, the legendary samurai doomed to wander these woods. The tales spoke of his restless spirit, forever searching for redemption, or perhaps a way to end his torment. Was this a place he frequented in his death, seeking solace, or perhaps perpetuating his torment? The thought of the samurai's ghostly figure, clad in ancient armor, sent a shiver through Dr. Tanaka. The thought sent a shiver down Dr. Tanaka's spine. He could almost feel the samurai's presence, a cold, spectral hand resting on his shoulder, urging him to understand the sorrow that bound him to this place. He had come to the forest seeking peace, but he had found only a deepening sense of unease. The tranquility he had hoped for was replaced by a growing dread, a feeling that he was not alone. The forest held secrets, he realized, secrets that whispered on the wind and lingered in the shadows. The trees seemed to murmur among themselves, their leaves rustling with voices that spoke of ancient rites and forgotten tragedies. And as he stood before the ancient shrine, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something best left undisturbed. The weight of history pressed down on him, and he knew that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, some stories left untold.